Hey everybody, it's Mick Levinskas here from She's Building a Robot, and I'm joined by Vivienne Ming. Vivienne is in another part of the world. Unfortunately, we couldn't be together even as much as we'd like to. Vivienne, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. I always love chatting, particularly to audiences that are making a change in their life or a change in the world.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's the goal. The book's coming out in 2 weeks' time. I'm not sure when people are going to be listening to this video, but the thing we spoke about and what I'd love to hear from you is what was the inflection point in your life that got you into technology and really accelerated your path towards making that your life passion?
You know, it's always great when these are crystal clear stories, when you can point to one moment. And the thing about my life is I can point to moments. You know, there are clear components that make me who I am. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative. The whole thing is who I am today. So without dragging us through 5 hours just getting started on the craziness that is Vivienne Ming, let me hit a few of those moments. One is not one single moment. It is a series of Sundays. So this is me as a little kid growing up in America, in California. My dad, who was a sharecropper when he was a kid, I mean, as poor as you can get for a white guy in America, but grew up to become a doctor, raised his family in California. And almost every night, at least this is the way it feels sort of in my soul today, we would sit down on late Sunday evening on the PBS, the public television station in America, and we would watch all of these imports from the UK. So it starts off with, nature, and not just from the UK, but Cosmos and all of these science shows. And of course, I just would get lost in the possibilities of what's out there, whether it's the natural world or the physical world, or even one of my favorite documentary series of all times, Connections, which looks at everything. Where we all, the technological world that we live in, where does it come from? So that was the start of the night. Then next came Monty Python and Blackadder and not as great Benny Hill, but all of these BBC comedies, and then finally Doctor Who. And the reason I go through all 3 of those is, boy, is that me today. That kind of just absurd sense of humor. I am a huge sci-fi nerd. I write it, I read it. And when I try to think about how to solve a new problem, what I start with is actually a sci-fi writing trick, which is imagine the world that you want to be true to write your story. Now, what not maybe happened, not could have happened, what must have happened for that world to be true? And now you can inhabit that world. You know the one change that gave you what you want to write about. Well, it turns out I love sci-fi writing, but I'm great at sci-fi inventing, taking things that sound like they can't exist and coming up with at least some way of making them happen. And I do it like a sci-fi writer. It's just, I happen to know a couple of different ways to actually build this stuff because I got to study brains and I got to study artificial intelligence. And, that gives you an enormous amount of power. So that's one, each of those nights. 2 is, unfortunately, those nights and all the amazing things my parents gave me weren't enough. When I was a kid, I was very unhappy. And I couldn't figure out how to make me work. And when I finally went off to university, I pretty promptly flunked out and ended up homeless. Now, that doesn't have to be any of your stories or anyone's, in my opinion. It is unfortunate that it was mine, but I learned something from that I'd like to pass along. And it is truly a single night. And it was the hardest night I've ever had. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but somehow I got through it. And I learned this one thing from the darkest night you can imagine, which is it's not about me. It's not about my happiness. It's about whether I have a purpose that's bigger than I am. And that is, if you didn't have the good fortune of just having your brain wired up that way from the start, that can be an incredibly hard thing to learn. Everything about your brain tells you it's all about you. It's all what your friends think of you. It's what your teachers and your parents think. It's that just screams at you from your amygdala and your frontal lobes. It's everything. Well, it's nothing. It's not about you. It's certainly not about me. And it's not even about your happiness. And that may sound like a terrifying truth to learn, but here is the thing I learned on the other side of that. So that was a night in 1995. I get that most of you weren't alive, and I hate you a little bit because of that, but I'm sure you're good people despite being young and beautiful and healthy. Nonetheless, what I learned over the next 10 years is if you want a truly amazing life, you have to give it to someone else. So what I learned over those next 10 years is if it's not about you and if it's not about your happiness, if you find something that's bigger than you, you do get happiness. You find that thing you were searching for all that time. And it only comes if that's not the reason you're doing it. Now, I'm not saying no one ever just gets lucky in life. Of course they do. But if you really want to control the impact you have on the world and even on yourself, just give it away. It comes back. It comes back tenfold. And I'm not saying this because I'm a spiritual person, but if you are, that works too. For me, what was bigger than me was the idea that I could live a life that made other people's lives better. And that takes me to another moment. There's going to be 3 out of 4. I've made up my mind. I'm going to restrict it to 4 moments. 3 out of 4. This is a coin toss. So I went back to that same university that I'd flunked out of and ended up homeless. And for reasons I even to this day can't explain, but I figured out, you know what? I'm going to do my entire undergraduate degree in a single year. And, I'm a snob, so STEM, like it's got to be a technical field. So I figured out there were 2 degrees because despite my troubles in life, I'd always done very well on standardized tests. So I'd tested out of all sorts of stuff. So I found there were 2 things I could do in a single year. I get a degree in math, economics, well, 3 things as it turns out, math, economics, and neuroscience. And I thought, math, what am I ever going to do with that? Tossed it out. Little did I know. I truly wish I'd studied math, but then maybe if I did, my life wouldn't have turned out the way it did. But boy, never walk away from math. It's all math in the end. So I literally flipped a coin between economics and neuroscience. You may think, but I thought this was about something bigger than you. Yeah, well, it's bigger than brains and dollars too. Both of those were things I could finish in a year. Again, totally insane, but also things, tools through which I believe I could make a bigger change in the world. And I had plans for either, whatever that, it came up heads or tails, I would run with it. Well, it came up heads, so I studied brains. And yes, it's not a made up story. I truly studied neuroscience because a coin toss came up heads. So sometimes luck or life gives you something and you just run with it as far as you can. The irony is the last paper I wrote was an economics paper. Turns out nothing's closing a door. I know every moment right now in your life, and I'm saying this to everyone, I bet it feels this way if you're 80. Every big decision that's coming up next feels like it is the single biggest decision you will ever make. If you don't make this one right, everything else is ruined. It's a lie. It's always a lie, and you're telling it to yourself, which is what makes it most tragic. Listen, you can't do worse than I did, short of doing the last and most terrible thing you can do to yourself. And you can come back from any of it. And I did, because it turns out not only did I finish my undergraduate degree in a single year, I got perfect grades in every class. I got to choose where in the world I wanted to go for grad school. And not only that, I got to absurdly tell all of these PhD potential advisors, they said, what do you want to study? And I got to say cyborgs, because I'm a sci-fi nerd and because that's what I wanted to build. And they said, that's awesome. Well, most of them did. A meaningful number of them scooted away from me for fear that my crazy was contagious, a la the Martian Chronicles, deep cut for sci-fi fans. So that takes me to the last one, which is a little good and a little bad. Because the funny thing, everything up through that moment was, boy, I've had a lot of different lives. So I'd already gone through a couple of different lives, because I'd had the homeless life, and I'd had the life with my family, and I'd had the life at school. Well, it turns out I launched a new life, because one of the reasons I was so unhappy all this time is that I was a woman, and I wasn't. I started my life as a little boy, and there's this famous saying, the only thing gender transition can change is your gender. I had a lot of things that I needed to figure out, and it turns out giving away, finding a purpose in life, even a very grounded humanist one, solved a lot of those problems. But there was still one left. So I made that change, and I lost my position at Stanford as a result. Yeah. Now, it wasn't Stanford, and it wasn't the most obscene malice, but, the person who made that decision told me that I'd lost my edge. They couldn't see in Vivienne the passion and the anger that they saw in the person I used to be. And the reason I share this as the last important inflection point is because I went from being a pretty damn good scientist to being someone amazing. In the year since, I founded 6 companies. I have invented nearly 100 new technologies, ranging from brain implants to systems to measure economic inclusion, to education technology. I even got to invent an AI to treat my own son's diabetes. And we just gave it away because it made the world better, because it existed. I needed to be me. All of the amazing things that I've been able to do, I've done as Vivienne, I've done as a woman. And I couldn't have done them as that other person that was so angry and so unhappy. I'm not any smarter than I used to be, though maybe I use my smarts a little better. And boy, the number of times venture capitalists didn't want to fund my companies because they didn't think someone with long blonde hair knew how to run a business. Or literally the day I transitioned was the last day anyone ever asked me a math class, even in my own lab. So, those things are real.
Yeah.
Yet I got better.
Yeah. One thing I want to dig in on that is it's been a little bit of time since that happened to you, and you've blazed a trail as I think a number of people who've transitioned, and there's been at least an increased conversation and dialogue around gender and gender roles, etc. And my book has 2 strong female characters, a few, and it's mentors as well, but also Lee, who is we just don't refer to Lee's gender throughout the whole book. And my goal was to leave it completely ambiguous. And I don't have any direct exposure to that in my life. It's never been something I've faced with directly, but it's something I recognized was a part of a bigger conversation I wanted to at least acknowledge and be aware of. But given your path and what I guess is, my guess is you're an inspiration to thousands of people who are either facing or have faced that in their lives. Is it getting better? Are we getting better? Are things changing in the right direction?
When I was little, and the idea of transition just seemed like a total fantasy. The only representation of this in the media, and I'm sure this is true US, UK, Australia, it doesn't matter, is at best, I mean, the best possible story is you're the punchline of the high school reunion joke. It's the football captain who comes back and now he is a stripper, because you never get to be a she. In fact, there's this famous American sitcom, Will and Grace, which was the first one that had a major, lead gay character. And they did that same terrible joke in that what is supposed to be a sort of this queer celebration. So, growing up, there's no one like me. There's no one like me in the sciences, or at least no one that I had ever heard of. There's certainly no one like me in politics or in business. And I guess there's one thing I can say as a point of pride, which is that will never be true again. I'm certainly not the only person. There's still very few of us that have been had the good fortune of being truly successful at these sorts of endeavors. But we are certainly not alone. And if you're growing up now, you're growing up in a world where you've seen the proof that your hard work can pay off, that you have the chance to build a better world for yourself and for the people around you, just like I did. And the wonderful aspect about it is you get to learn that earlier in life. I'm fortunate that I didn't wait forever, but I certainly did lead a large part of my life very unhappy and very alone, because I hadn't figured these things. But you know what? It is, I can also put on now my really geeky scientist hat and say, listen, there's actually been a lot of research about this, whether we're talking about entrepreneurship or the sciences, that line from that person at Stanford, you've lost your edge, that is a pretty common story, that it isn't even just about being biologically female. It's about being feminine. So now we're including anyone who might be born female or transition to it or be gender fluid, right? You're ruling out anyone that's not aggressively masculine as somehow not being capable of being an entrepreneur, or and it's interesting because there's even nuance by the field. So if you ask people in a field, is a certain discipline a function of raw genius or hard work, then you'll get certain splits. In the sciences, for example, you get physics as raw genius, biology is hard work. And in the humanities, philosophy is raw genius, and I guess everything else is hard work. And sure enough, both gender representation and gender bias follows that continuum. And so it's interesting to note that we've got, whether it's cultural or even something a little bit in our heads, we've got this deep instinct that tells us a deep voice and a sure hand is part of the, almost literally the DNA of an inventor. And yet there's actually no good evidence that's true. Quite the opposite. Over the last 50 years, the more women that were, the more the authors of a scientific paper, the more women were represented on those authorships, innovation goes up. So the more innovative the ideas in the papers. This amazing computational linguistics group at Stanford did this research. They analyzed basically every paper. And they found the more women in the authors, the more the innovation goes up. And generally true, the more diverse the authorship, the more the innovation goes up. Here's the heartbreak side. The more women in the authors, the fewer citations that paper will get. So you do exactly what you're supposed to. You innovate and create, and you don't get the same rewards. And that's really frustrating, and that's hard. But again, it's not about you, and it's not about your happiness. Are you living a life that's making other people's lives better?
That's right, and I think it's unfortunately also there's a requirement for patience. Like I think I think my sense is, and I say this from a very clear position of peak privilege as a white, older male, relatively wealthy to the rest of the world. Like, I get my some of my privilege. I don't think I'll ever fully understand and appreciate it, but I do think, as a dad of girls and as a friend of people with different sexualities, and I do think that we are going in a good direction. It does seem painfully slow at times, but it is in the right direction. And I think about like Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns. It's just starting at a low base, and that base is all of humanity thinking that women can't, still humanity thinking the women can't do some things, and that if you have a different kind of sexuality, that is wrong. And I'm just like, we will get there, but we're not going to get there tomorrow. And it's the reason why. And sometimes I thought, writing this book, I was like, it's one little story. How is one story going to make a dent on this massive waterfall and ocean of history against and precedent? And I was like, you know what? Every little dent actually is what's important. Every Vivienne Ming that's out there blazing the trail, proving the path, is another good story. Every She's Building a Robot book is another good story. It's like, we'll get there. We'll get there.
We will. And you know what? For all of the extra work, I actually call it the tax on being different. All of the extra work that you have to do to push through because you're different. And everyone's different in some way. But obviously, some of these are much more evident in our daily lives than others, and come with a greater cost, a greater tax. But know that there's an inverse side to it, which is if you pay that extra cost, your impact is bigger. So another area of research I've gotten to do, again, playing with AI to answer questions that sound like they have nothing to do with AI. We are actually able to build these little AIs, send it to the websites of 60,000 companies, and collect variables to try and understand gender wage gap. So why, do men on average make more than women? And by the way, it's not like this has never been researched. There are Nobel Prize winners that have written papers about this. In fact, it seems like almost every economist writes a paper about it at some point. And the story is really crystal clear. Women make different work choices than men. By the way, one of those aspects of understanding your privilege is understanding how absurd that is as a complete statement of what's going on. Because if you've never had anyone talk to your chest, your own employees, if you've never had your board question whether you should be part of a negotiation because the other side might feel uncomfortable, or a reporter ask whether, ask with total innocence, is it okay if we put your picture in the paper? And what they don't mean, can we use it? They mean, are you passable? Right? So this is a different world for women and men. Understand that. But even then, even if women make different choices than men, I'm still not satisfied. Why do they make different choices? That just seems to assume women are just fundamentally different than men and therefore make different choices, and that leads to all sorts of problems. I'm not going to take you through the whole bit of research, but if you want to know the single biggest predictor that my little AIs found, it's how many female faces are in the pictures of the leadership team. The more women run the company, the lower the wage gap is. And so if it was just women's choices, it shouldn't matter who's running the company, right? But here's the more important point. The reason wage gap drops when there's women in representation, and this will go for any group that's underrepresented, the reason wage gap drops is because those younger women choose to work harder. They put in those extra hours that on average they weren't before, because now they live in a world where they have evidence that their hard work will pay off. So if you push through and you create something, know that you're not just changing your life, you become that person, person from the neighborhood or from your hometown that now everybody knows, that proved that you could do it too.
Vivienne, I really appreciate your time. You've given me so much already, and I've loved our chats. We could chat for 5 hours about this, and honestly, the world needs to keep having these 5-hour chats. Thank you so much for sharing your story of inspiration. I love everything from the Sunday Monty Python and Science and Nature, the 1-year course, how you battled through that, the transition and got to a wonderful, amazing place, and that story of inspiration. So thank you so much for sharing. And I really appreciate your support for She's Building a Robot.
It was wonderful talking with you again, and an amazing book. So congratulations.
Thank you.